Well, good afternoon. Today we're in Psalm 100 and I believe it's chapter 22. Psalm 122. It's a familiar psalm to many, and I want you to think about, especially today, just the first two verses. But let me introduce it by just commenting on the fact that a number of psalms that are in the book of Psalms are called ascent psalms, and here there was about 15. I don't know if we really need to know that. They were sort of you might even call them travelers songbooks. The behind the idea was you had pilgrims and sojourners that were traveling to Jerusalem, and under the law, or the Old Testament, God had compelled them to go to Jerusalem three times a year for the different feast days, like Pentecost and the Passover. And you have to remember that journeying to Jerusalem, getting there oftentimes was difficult and time consuming and took a lot of effort. Now, let me say something else here because going to Jerusalem under the Old Testament was very important, and there was a lot of reasons for that, primarily worship, but there was also the purpose of unity, keeping the nation together. And so in this psalm, and I'll read verse 1 and 2 in just a moment, but in this psalm, I want you to focus on the invitation. This is some of the thoughts that I had as I was looking at that today. So let's look at verses just 1 and 2. And while I'm still remembering something, I suppose I ought to just say this. Jerusalem today, currently, does not carry the same significance that it did under the Old Testament. Really, Jerusalem does not carry biblically the importance that it did in Old Testament times. As a matter of fact, the very concept of Jerusalem sometimes is used in the New Testament to refer to the church. For example, Galatians chapter 4 and especially Romans chapter 9 and following there. The Israel of God actually is the church, spiritually speaking. Now that probably needs more time to develop that, but just trying to suggest to you that there is no mandate for Christian people to go to Jerusalem today. In fact, most people couldn't, other than just to be enamored by the city and perhaps some historical value where Jesus lived and walked and some of the things that occurred there, but certainly not um, a mandate that Christian people are to go there. If you were a Jew under the law, you were supposed to be there three times a year. And certainly, a Christian doesn't need to do that. He's not under any kind of divine obligation to do so. Now, with that said, there is some principles here I want you to see. Beginning in verse number 1, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet shall stand within the gates, O Jerusalem. Now, let's think about this for just a moment today. First of all, if you notice, someone was invited to go. And I want to stress, or at least emphasize, the importance of inviting somebody to go. Uh, it can make a profound difference. Sometimes we underestimate just the value of a simple invitation, inviting somebody to church. And in in fact, if we think about this, most of us, at least those of us who did not grow up within the ranks of Christianity, we were all completely on the outside. Most of us will go back at some point and remember somebody invited us to go. And so we had to make a decision. You're invited to church, and today a lot of people have a lot of reasons why they don't want to go. They're not interested. They're doing something else. They're busy. In fact, even people who profess to be Christians find reasons that they don't have to attend. And so when somebody invites them, that does not necessarily mean they're even going to go. So, but I'm talking some of you folks who have been invited perhaps some years ago, or maybe even recently, and you were willing to go and you decided to go, and it made a difference in your life. When I think about it myself, it goes back 40 some years ago when someone simply invited me to go and I went. And it made a world of difference. So I just want to stress in the first place, don't you ever underestimate the value just of simply inviting somebody to church. It can change their life and bring salvation. Now, notice here that the person that is asked, of course, makes the decision to go. He's willing to go, and he rejoices. And I think when you look in verse 2, there's where he arrives into the city. And you know, you go into the city back in those days, a lot of those folks never been in a big city, and they'd have been enamored by the size of the city, and perhaps they went around and looked at all the beautiful buildings, as people do when they go to historical cities. And the temple, of course, was just in the days of Jesus, was just a beautiful temple, and it was also during the days of Solomon, and so they would have been enamored. But I'm trying to stress it wasn't the building or the cities, but the temple was the very presence of God. Now let me just say this again without getting into any deep study on this, but if you look in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 16, and also chapter 6, he talks about the church being the temple of God. And so what we're suggesting to you is this. For those of you who even think about inviting somebody to church, I want to encourage you to do that. And, you know, you're helping somebody else come to the Lord. And again, I want to just say, in the end, the person who was invited, at least in the psalm, was glad that he did. And I'm just guessing, or my judgment is that there's a whole lot of us that are glad that somebody at some point, sometime, invited us to church because it made a difference in our life. And so that's the thought we want to leave today, and that is to invite somebody to church, bring them to God. Don't underestimate the value of inviting somebody. I'll tell you what, you're going to invite some folks, and they're going to come, and they'll be glad that they came. See you tomorrow.